You have probably experienced this at least once in your life. You buy a red car. A few days later, you start seeing red cars everywhere. On your way to work, in parking lots, outside grocery stores, at traffic lights. And you begin to wonder, have there always been this many red cars? Or maybe you hear a new word, a psychological term, a medical condition, a brand name, a concept you had never paid attention to before. Then over the next few days, you keep running into it on YouTube, on Facebook, in conversations, in the news. It feels as if the entire world suddenly started talking about that exact thing. Many people assume this happens because the thing itself has become more common. But, in most cases, the outside world has not changed very much. What changes is the way your brain processes information. This is called the Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon, also known as the frequency illusion. It is not just an interesting psychological effect. It reveals something important about how the brain creates the version of reality that each of us experiences. To understand this phenomenon, you first need to understand a simple fact. Your brain cannot process everything your eyes see. Every second, an enormous amount of information enters your nervous system. Colors, sounds, faces, words, advertisements, smells, movements, light, temperature. If your brain tried to process all of it, you would become overwhelmed almost immediately. The brain simply does not have the resources to do that. Many people think the eyes work like a camera. Whatever enters the lens gets recorded. But that is not how perception works. Your eyes collect far more information than your conscious mind ever receives. The brain selects only a small portion. In other words, what you are aware of is not everything you see. It is the part your brain considers important. Psychologists call this selective attention. It is one of the most important functions of the human brain. Without it, you could not focus on a book. You could not drive a car. You could not follow a conversation. You could not perform any task that requires concentration. Imagine sitting inside a crowded coffee shop. Dozens of conversations are happening around you. Music is playing. Coffee machines are running. Doors are opening and closing. Chairs are moving across the floor. Yet you can still focus on the person sitting across from you. Your brain is constantly filtering out most of the surrounding noise. Not because it disappears, but because it is not being prioritized. The same thing happens with vision. When something is not relevant to your current goals, your brain often pushes it into the background. It is still there, but you barely notice it. When your interests change, something that used to remain in the background suddenly moves into the foreground. You begin seeing it more often. That is why someone who just became pregnant notices babies everywhere. Someone searching for a new job notices career opportunities everywhere. Someone dealing with back pain notices advertisements related to spine health everywhere. The information did not change. The filter changed, but selective attention alone does not fully explain why something suddenly feels like it is everywhere. A second mechanism is operating at the same time. Confirmation bias. Suppose you learn about a new electric vehicle today. Tomorrow, you see one on the road. Your brain notices it. That sighting becomes memorable. 2 days later, you see another one. Your brain notices again. After several experiences like this, you begin to feel that this vehicle is becoming extremely common. What you do not notice is that your brain is not counting every other vehicle you pass. It is only marking the ones connected to your current interest. Everything else fades into the background. This is why perceived frequency and actual frequency are not always the same thing. Something can feel more common without actually becoming more common. Sometimes. The increase exists only inside your awareness from an evolutionary perspective. This makes perfect sense. The brain was not designed to create a perfectly accurate representation of reality. It was designed to help human beings survive. Those are not the same goal. Imagine one of your ancestors, thousands of years ago. One day, They discover signs of a predator near their shelter. From that moment on, their brain becomes more sensitive to anything related to danger. A sound in the bushes, footprints on the ground, an unusual movement nearby. The brain begins searching for similar signs everywhere. If the threat is real, this response increases the chances of survival. If the brain becomes overly cautious, the cost is usually just a little extra anxiety. In nature, that mistake is far less dangerous than ignoring a real threat. This is one reason the human brain is naturally drawn to patterns. Patterns help us predict. Patterns help us learn. Patterns help us survive. The Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon is a byproduct of that system. There is another part of this phenomenon that many people overlook when discussing the frequency illusion. Most people focus on what suddenly appears. A more interesting question is what remains invisible. Look around the room you are sitting in right now. You can probably see a desk, a chair, a door, a window, objects that feel familiar. But can you remember the exact number of electrical outlets in the room? Can you describe every door hinge? Can you recall every detail on the nearest curtain? Most people cannot. Not because their eyes failed to see those things, but because their brain never considered them important enough to remember. This means your experience of reality is always filtered. The brain behaves less like a camera and more like an editor. It decides what moves to the front, what stays in the background, what deserves attention, what can safely be ignored. That is why two people can walk into the same restaurant and remember completely different things. One notices the prices, another notices the service, one notices the music, another notices the interior design. Everyone believes they experienced the same place. In reality, each person experienced a slightly different version of it. Today, social media amplifies this phenomenon dramatically. You watch one video about insomnia. The platform recommends 10 more. You read one article about diabetes. The algorithm begins showing related content. After a few days, it feels like everyone is talking about the same issue. At that point, your brain is filtering information, and the algorithm is filtering information. Both systems are focusing on the same topic. The feeling of frequency becomes much stronger. The Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon does more than explain why something suddenly seems to be everywhere. It reminds us of something larger. The things you pay attention to each day gradually shape the world you believe you live in. If you focus on opportunities, you will notice more opportunities. If you focus on risks, you will notice more risks. If you constantly consume negative news, your brain will remember negative information more easily. Over time, the world may begin to look increasingly similar to whatever occupies your attention. That does not mean what you see is false. It simply means it is not the entire picture, because beyond the boundaries of your attention, many other things still exist. The next time a new idea seems to appear everywhere, a disease, a product, a trend, a topic, ask yourself a simple question. Did the world change? Or did my mental filter change? Many times, the answer is the second one. And that is what makes the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon worth understanding. Not every change in your experience begins in the outside world. Some changes begin with where your brain chooses to place its attention.